In the basement of a San Francisco art museum, Melissa Johnson was carefully inspecting a newly arrived collection of 19th-century watercolors. The dimness of the room enveloped her in silence. This quietness was comforting to her, especially on a day like today when she had escaped a family gathering. The phone rang, and when Melissa realized it was her mother Diane, she let out a small sigh. "Did you hear? Vanessa is going on a Mediterranean cruise with Brad. It's to celebrate his company's new partnership. Isn't that wonderful?" Melissa closed her eyes and held the phone slightly away from her ear. This was the standard conversation with her mother, tales of her sister Vanessa's success. Diane always said that Vanessa had made the right choices. She went to a prestigious business school, married a corporate CEO, and was now the family's pride and joy. "That's nice," Melissa replied flatly. "But I'm busy preparing for a new exhibition right now. Can I call you back later? It's always the same conversation with you. What do you expect to find in that little museum? A good man? A stable future?" Diane's voice was tinged with the usual disappointment. Her father Robert was an honest plumber who had worked hard all his life to support his family. But for Diane, that was never enough. She was always putting on airs, wanting a better life for her daughters. The definition of a better was the problem. For Melissa, better meant having passion for her work and living honestly. After hanging up, Melissa left the museum and headed to her usual cafe. The cold autumn wind caressed her cheeks. When she arrived at the cafe, she sat by the window and ordered a hot coffee. Her modest but fulfilling daily routine. The usual? The familiar waitress smiled. As Melissa nodded, a voice came from the neighboring table. "Excuse me, is this seat taken? Everywhere else is full." Looking up, she saw a man with warm brown eyes standing there. He wore casual jeans and a navy sweater. He looked a bit tired, but his smile was charming. "Please," Melissa smiled back. "Thank you. I'm Jack Martin," the man extended his hand. "I'm Melissa." He ordered coffee, and conversation began to flow naturally. Jack said he was a taxi driver. It was a job that let him know every corner of the city and briefly touch many different lives. She sensed intelligence and kindness in his way of speaking. "So you work at the museum? That's wonderful." Surrounded by art every day, Jack's words were tinged with admiration. Melissa opened her heart to this man's genuine response. He was truly interested in her work. "What about you? What made you become a taxi driver?" "I like talking to people. And having flexible hours is a big plus." Jack gazed off slightly. "I can go to different places and see glimpses of different lives." After that, they began meeting regularly. Melissa was drawn to Jack's humility and intelligence. He was well versed in literature and art, and sometimes visited the museum, asking enthusiastic questions about the exhibitions. When she told her family about him, the response was predictable. "A taxi driver?" Diane frowned. "You should aim higher. Look at Vanessa. How do you think she met Brad? At an upscale restaurant. You should be going to places like that." Melissa didn't argue. She had learned that she couldn't change her mother. One rainy night, Melissa was having dinner at Jack's apartment. Against the backdrop of rain tapping on the windows, he took her hand. "I'm so happy I met you." Melissa smiled, but there was a heavy secret in her heart. A few weeks earlier, her doctor had told her she was likely infertile. Having children would be almost impossible. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you," she said with a trembling voice. Then she revealed everything. Jack squeezed her hand firmly. "You're perfect as you are. I want to spend my life with you, with or without children." Tears welled up. She hadn't expected to be accepted like this. When she told her family about her infertility, Diane's reaction was cold. "All the more reason why you should find a better match. A financially stable man would give you options, like adoption." But Melissa's decision was firm. She had decided to marry Jack. Jack sometimes received mysterious phone calls. And occasionally, his gifts to Melissa seemed too expensive for his salary. When she asked about it, he just smiled and said, "I have connections." Melissa trusted him, so she didn't pry further. As wedding preparations progressed, Vanessa came to visit her sister. "Are you serious? Marrying a taxi driver?" She looked at Melissa with disbelief. "Brad is at the top of his industry. He knows plenty of men we could introduce you to." Melissa just smiled and answered, "I love Jack. Not his job, but who he is." A wedding date was set, and invitations were sent out. A few of Jack's close friends and, reluctantly, Melissa's family responded that they would attend. Vanessa gave Melissa a final warning, "Don't say I didn't warn you." Melissa quietly replied, "Don't worry. I won't regret my choice." The night before the wedding, Melissa noticed Jack talking earnestly on the phone at his apartment. "Have everything arranged for tomorrow?" "Yes, the best." She wondered about it but assumed it was something for their special day and quietly smiled. On the wedding day, a small garden in the San Francisco suburbs was bathed in gentle autumn sunlight. Melissa took a deep breath as she looked at herself in the mirror of her dressing room. The simple white dress fit her slender figure perfectly, and she wore her grandmother's lace shawl on her shoulders. There was a knock at the door, and her father Robert peeked in. "Ready?" There were tears glistening in his eyes. Melissa smiled. Robert approached his daughter and took her hand. "As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. I think that Jack is a good man." Melissa felt warmth in her heart at her father's honest words. He was the only one in her family who respected her choices. The ceremony was small but heartfelt. Jack was waiting at the altar in a simple black suit. A few of his close friends sat in the front row, nodding to Melissa with shy smiles. In the back sat Melissa's family. Her mother Diane had a stern expression, wearing an expensive wine-red dress, unconsciously clutching her husband's arm. Vanessa and Brad were dressed in high-end designer clothes, looking down at their surroundings. As they exchanged vows and rings, tears of joy welled up in Melissa's eyes. While placing the ring on her finger, Jack whispered, "I will love you forever." His voice held unwavering certainty. After the ceremony, a small reception was held under a white tent set up in the garden. Champagne was poured, and light refreshments were served. Jack's friends offered heartfelt congratulations and chatted amiably with the newlyweds. However, Melissa's family, especially her mother and sister, clearly felt uncomfortable. Diane was surveying the surroundings with a judgmental eye as she drank what must have been her third or fourth glass of champagne. "It's time for speeches," the host announced. "First, we'll hear from the bride's mother, Mrs. Diane Johnson." Diane rose unsteadily to her feet and took the microphone. Her eyes were a bit unfocused from the champagne. "Hello, everyone," she began in a slightly high-pitched voice. "Today is a special day for my daughter Melissa." The first words were typical congratulatory remarks. She expressed joy at her daughter's growth and welcomed Jack into the family. But after a few minutes, her tone began to change. "Melissa has always been a special child," Diane said, choosing her words carefully. "She always went her own way, sometimes against the family's expectations." The atmosphere in the venue grew tense. Melissa squeezed Jack's hand under the table. "The path she chose was, well, not what I had hoped for." Diane took another sip from her glass. Then suddenly, she let out an unnaturally loud laugh. "What a special day. A low-wage taxi driver marrying an infertile failure. Just kidding." The venue froze. Melissa felt the blood drain from her face. Jack squeezed her hand even tighter. In the silence where no one laughed, Vanessa smirked and said, "That's for sure." Suddenly, her friends began to chuckle. "He's nothing compared to my CEO husband." Vanessa raised her glass and looked proudly at Brad. Melissa's body trembled with anger and humiliation. She desperately tried to hold back the tears that threatened to overflow. Her father Robert stood up and said in a stern voice, "Diane, that's enough." But Diane ignored his words and tried to continue. At that moment, Jack quietly stood up. He gently held Melissa's hand and whispered in a low voice. "Should I tell them the truth about myself?" Melissa looked into her husband's calm eyes. Seeing the determination and love reflected there, she slowly nodded. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Jack gently wiped away her tears and began walking toward the microphone. The venue held its breath, watching in suspense as the quiet groom approached. Jack's expression was calm, showing no sign of anger. He cleared his throat slightly and began speaking quietly. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day with Melissa and me." His voice was low and composed, but it resonated throughout the venue. Diane awkwardly returned to her seat, and Vanessa crossed her arms with a cold expression. "There was mention that I'm a taxi driver." "That's true," Jack smiled. "I do drive a taxi. Twice a week, at set times." Whispers spread through the venue. Even Melissa looked at her husband with a puzzled expression. "However, it's a hobby for me, a way to connect with people's lives," he continued. "It's not my profession." Diane furrowed her brow, and Vanessa and Brad exchanged confused glances. 10 years ago, I started a technology venture in a garage. That startup was acquired by a major company 2 years later, and since then, I've founded and successfully exited several companies. Jack's words changed the atmosphere in the room. Melissa's family's expressions froze in particular. "Recently, I founded a company called Innovate Now, which I sold to a major technology firm last year." The moment he mentioned that name, Vanessa's husband Brad suddenly changed color and stood up. "Martin," he said with an incredulous expression. "Jack Martin?" Jack calmly smiled and nodded. "I thought you looked familiar," Brad continued with a trembling voice. "So you're the J. Martin." He turned to explain to those around him. "He's a legend in the industry. One of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley." The venue buzzed with whispers. Melissa looked at her husband with wide eyes, then at her mother. Diane had gone pale, her lips trembling. Brad continued with increasing excitement. "The sale price of Innovate Now wasn't disclosed, but industry insiders say it exceeded $2 billion. He's one of the most influential figures in our industry." Vanessa's eyes widened at her husband's words, and her hand holding the wine glass trembled. Jack quietly adjusted the microphone. "I wasn't interested in flaunting that. I wanted to build genuine relationships. I wanted to find someone who would value me for who I am, not for my money or status." He turned back to look at Melissa, sending her a loving gaze. "And I found her." Tears glistened in Melissa's eyes. She smiled in response to her husband's gaze. "Melissa fell in love with me as a taxi driver. She listened to my stories and was interested in my thoughts, not my bank account or my company's." Jack turned back to face the audience. "By driving a taxi, I can connect with various lives. Rich or poor, successful or struggling, everyone rides in the same car and gets stuck in the same traffic jams. I think there's truth in that." Melissa's father Robert was smiling proudly. Meanwhile, Diane and Vanessa stood speechless, completely dumbfounded. "Now, about that infertile failure comment," Jack changed his tone slightly. "Melissa honestly told me about our low chances of having children. It was very difficult for her." He took a deep breath and continued. "But for me, that doesn't diminish our love. Families come in many forms. We have options. Adoption is one, but that's something Melissa and I will decide together." Diane blushed with embarrassment and lowered her gaze. "Let me say one last thing," Jack raised his voice slightly. "Today is our wedding day. I wish it to be a place for congratulations, not criticism or comparisons." The venue fell silent, hanging on his every word. "Melissa, thank you for meeting me. You saw me as a person, not for my titles or wealth. That's what matters most to me." He put down the microphone and returned to Melissa. She stood up and embraced her husband tightly. Warm applause erupted from the audience. Robert stood up and raised his champagne glass high. "To the bride and groom." Everyone stood up and raised their glasses. Even Diane and Vanessa, embarrassed but certainly, lifted their glasses. The celebration resumed. Music played, and people began to dance. But the atmosphere at Melissa's family's table had completely changed. Brad approached Jack and tried to hand him a business card. "Could we talk sometime?" Jack politely accepted the card but gently declined. "Let's enjoy the celebration today. Business talk can wait." Melissa found her mother standing alone on the terrace. She approached quietly. "Mom." Diane turned and looked at her daughter's face. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying, and her makeup was slightly smudged. "Melissa, She stumbled over her words. "I know you didn't know," Melissa said quietly. "It's not just that," Diane said with a trembling voice. "I was wrong. About you, about Jack, about everything." Melissa silently waited for her mother to continue. "I've always lived pretending to be something I'm not. Ashamed of your father's job, seeking a better life." Tears welled up in Diane's eyes. "But today, I realized what I've been missing." Melissa took her mother's hand. "It's not too late." Diane squeezed her daughter's hand back. "Can you forgive me?" "With time," Melissa said gently. "Today is a day of new beginnings." The two stood quietly on the terrace, looking up at the dusk sky. The next morning, in a luxury suite at a downtown San Francisco hotel, Melissa stepped onto the balcony and took a deep breath. The city sprawled below, wrapped in morning mist, with a part of the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance. Yesterday's events felt like a dream. Returning to the room, she found Jack pouring coffee for both of them. He smiled at his wife. "The phone's been ringing nonstop since early morning," he pointed at her smartphone. "It's yours." Melissa frowned as she picked up her phone. 15 missed calls. 8 from her mother, 7 from her sister Vanessa. And more than 20 text messages. "Well," Melissa said with surprise. "This might be the first time they've contacted me so much." Jack shrugged and laughed. "I could have predicted it." Melissa took a sip of coffee and took a deep breath. "I'm not sure whether to call them back." "I'll support whatever you decide," Jack placed his hand on her shoulder. "But it's something you'll have to face eventually." Melissa looked into her husband's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me you were such a successful entrepreneur?" Jack silently drank his coffee, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wanted you to see me for who I really am. Not my titles or wealth." He gazed out the window. "Too many people have been attracted to my money and status. I was looking for someone who would see the real me." Melissa nodded in understanding. She too knew the meaning of living by her own values, rather than family expectations or social standards. "All right, let's make that call," she decided. "Mom first." Diane answered on the first ring. "Melissa." "Oh, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you." "Good morning, Mom," Melissa said calmly. "Yesterday was." "I'm truly sorry," Diane's voice was unusually apologetic. "I was completely wrong. Jack is a wonderful person. Your choice was right." Melissa closed her eyes. She couldn't help but wonder what lay behind her mother's words. "Mom, are you saying my choice was right now that you know about Jack's wealth?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "That's not what I—" Diane hesitated. "Yes, I was surprised to learn about his status. But seeing you so happy—" "Mom, be honest," Melissa gently interrupted. "Until yesterday, you were against my marriage, weren't you?" Another silence. "Yes, I admit it," Diane reluctantly answered. "I was wrong. I'm sorry I hurt you." There was at least some sincerity in those words. "Let's have a family dinner tonight," Diane suggested. "I want to formally welcome you and Jack. Vanessa and Brad will be there too." Melissa looked at Jack, who shrugged in agreement. "All right, we'll come," she answered. The call with Vanessa was similar. Apologies and sudden intimacy. Sis, we're sisters, but we've grown so far apart, Vanessa said. Let's be close again. Melissa gave a wry smile. Since childhood, Vanessa had been their mother's favorite and always a competitor. She had rarely called Melissa a sis before. That night, the dinner at Diane and Robert's house was wrapped in a strange atmosphere. Diane had prepared the finest wine and a 3-course meal that was 3 times more elaborate than usual. The house was spotlessly clean, with fresh flowers in expensive vases. Welcome, Jack. Diane opened the door with a bright smile. Welcome to our home. Melissa inwardly frowned at her mother's excessive friendliness. At dinner, the conversation was awkward throughout. Diane and Vanessa were unnaturally polite and kind. Brad sat next to Jack, trying to bring up business topics. Where do you plan to live? Diane asked during the meal. A friend of mine has a wonderful property in Pacific Heights. I could introduce you. Jack smiled politely. Thank you, but we haven't decided yet. Our area is lovely too, Vanessa interjected. It's an upscale neighborhood with amazing views. Melissa lightly squeezed her husband's hand under the table. They had already secretly purchased a small but charming house near Melissa's apartment. It had a backyard for gardening and an extra room that could potentially become a child's room in the future. As the wine bottles emptied and dessert was served, the conversation gradually moved closer to the truth. Actually, Vanessa began, seemingly having difficulty speaking. Brad's company has been struggling lately. Melissa listened to her sister's words, wondering at the fact that she was showing vulnerability for the first time. The market has been down for 6 months, and investors are getting nervous, Brad explained. If Jack could give us some advice, it would really help. Jack said nothing, just nodded. And, Diane interrupted. We're also a bit worried about our retirement funds. She looked at Robert. He said nothing, just stared at the table. Robert has worked hard for many years, but our retirement savings aren't sufficient. Could you help us a little? Melissa's eyes widened. She had never imagined her mother would ask her for financial assistance. I mean, Vanessa continued further. We're family. It's natural to help each other, right? A heavy silence fell over the room. Melissa looked at Jack, and he looked back at her. A silent understanding passed between them. We'll consider it, Jack said calmly. Helping family is important. Diane and Vanessa looked relieved. After the dinner, when Melissa and Jack got into their car, they were silent for a few seconds. Then they suddenly burst out laughing. I can't believe it, Melissa shook her head. How their attitude changed so much in just one day. I expected it, Jack said as he started the car. Money and power change people. Especially the relationship between those who have it and those who don't. I don't think they've really changed, Melissa said, looking out the window. I agree, Jack nodded. But people have the potential to grow. With time, they might realize what truly matters. Melissa took her husband's hand. What about Mom and Vanessa? Are you really going to help them? Jack thought for a moment before answering. We can help them. But not just by giving money. He gave a meaningful smile. Let's give them something to think about. Melissa understood her husband's intention and nodded. It might be an opportunity for them to learn something. Yes, Jack agreed. I think real help is sharing values, not just money. Their car continued to drive through the San Francisco night scenery. In the anticipation of the new life beginning tomorrow and amid the complex relationships with their family, Melissa and Jack intended to find their own path. 1 year later, in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside San Francisco. From the window of Melissa and Jack's house, snow could be seen accumulating in the backyard. The modest but warm 2-story house was one they had chosen together, prioritizing comfort over luxury. The bookshelves were lined with art books and classic literature, and the walls were adorned with works by young artists that Melissa had selected. In the living room, Melissa was drawing something in a sketchbook by the fireplace. She continued her work at the museum while also rekindling her own art. Jack sat beside her with an open laptop, writing something. Preparing for your lecture? Melissa asked, noting her husband's concentrated expression. Jack smiled and nodded. For tomorrow's entrepreneurship class. I'm thinking about what to share with the young students. He was a guest lecturer on entrepreneurship at a local university once a week. He found joy in passing on his experience and knowledge to the younger generation. They're lucky to hear your stories, Melissa smiled. Jack closed his laptop and turned to her. Any recent reports from your family? Melissa put down her sketchbook and picked up her coffee cup. It seems Vanessa and Brad's company is slowly improving. Your advice and investment are working. A few months after the wedding, Melissa and Jack had decided to invest in Brad's company. However, it wasn't just financial assistance. Jack had set clear conditions. The company had to work on socially responsible projects and return a portion of annual profits to the community. And your mother? Jack asked. You might not believe it, but she started volunteering at a local women's shelter, Melissa said with a slightly surprised expression. It was initially our trust condition, but now she seems to genuinely enjoy it. Melissa and Jack had established a trust fund for Diane and Robert's retirement. The condition was simple: show compassion for others. Diane had reluctantly begun volunteering and gradually changed. Family conversations now had less of the former vanity and competitiveness. And us, Melissa looked at the stack of documents on the coffee table. They were adoption application papers. Our first interview is next month. Jack took her hand. Are you ready? Yes, Melissa nodded. A little scared, but happy. The phone rang, and when Melissa answered, she heard her mother's voice. Melissa, have you decided on Christmas plans? I'd love for you to come to our house. I'll think about it, Mom, Melissa answered. I'll discuss it with Jack. You know, Diane said somewhat hesitantly. To be honest, I want to hold a grandchild. Robert says so too. Melissa couldn't help but smile. Actually, Mom. She looked at Jack, who nodded in confirmation. We've started the adoption process. On the other end of the phone, Diane gasped. Really? There was genuine joy in her voice. This wasn't an act, but a pure emotion. Yes, we've just started, Melissa explained. Next year, maybe. Oh, that's wonderful, Diane's voice was mixed with tears. You'll both be wonderful parents. After hanging up, Melissa nestled against Jack. Mom seems to have really changed. Jack embraced her. People can change. But what they need is time and the right motivation. He whispered in her ear, it's the best gift money can't buy. Having the eyes to see true value. Outside the window, snow continued to fall quietly. Like the beginning of a new season, Melissa and Jack's life and their relationship with their family were moving into a new phase. Everyone was beginning to understand, little by little, what true value is and what family bonds really mean.